we put a Facebook poll out there, and 10 questions were issued from, or were sent in from across the nation. We don't have really any names associated with them, but the 10 questions we're going to ask, and we may get through all 10 or we may not. So question number 1, and this is for everyone to answer. So question number 1, how can we better manage fireground tasks with limited manpower in regard to 2-member companies?
I might be in a unique position to answer this. I started a consulting company after I was injured, retired, gone all over the United States looking at different rig layouts and spec, and I've been contracted by a number of agencies from very large to very small. And I think one thing that you can absolutely do to help maximize your efficiency, your life-saving potential, your property conservation potential is speccing and laying out your equipment in the absolute simplest manner possible. You know, you're basically going to war, and there's no reason to insert variables where you should have constants. And the less manpower or staffing that you have on your initial alarm, the more simple and direct the task should be. So I'd say start before you receive the alarm. That would be my suggestion.
Starting out from a 2-person engine company was kind of my first real line introduction. So I don't think it's anything really complex as much as it has to be simple, as Dennis was saying. Running through training and drills and finding out those minimal, deficiencies that will build up over time at an incident, getting those figured out and, taking the extra steps and realizing no matter what, it is a 2-person engine company, you're going to have to do extra work, but figuring out how to get over those small hiccups that occur and setting up your equipment, drilling, constantly and preparing is probably the, most simple way to get over that hump. Not overcomplicating things, but you just have to be prepared and figure out where you're losing time, where you're wasting time, and how you're stretching, and what time and place you're doing everything. So I think it's just that preparation mode is going to be where you're saving your most time and finding your ways to be efficient on a 2-person crew.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on some of the things that the other 2 guys said. I think that it speaks to a lot of things that we've talked about in terms of preparation, setting your equipment up for success, training so that you figure out what the deficiencies are so you can hit those critical fireground tasks. I work in an area where the minimum company that is going to show up is going to be, minimum amount of people that's going to show up is going to be 3. So, thinking outside the box in terms of having a 2-person company showing up, I think that, it's critical that you understand all the jobs that need to be done, and then what, the task above you or the people next to you are performing so that they're not in conflict. And constantly contingency planning, what-ifing everything so that, because if you've only got 2-person staffing, you got a lot of challenges that you face. So constantly contingency planning.
Yeah, let's start off with and speaking as somebody that 2-person staffing is not uncommon in our world, is that 2 people can do 2 people's worth of work. They can't do 4 people's worth of work. That said, you don't want them to do 1.5 persons worth of work. So it goes back to beginning with what Dennis said, is making sure that your rig is set up in a very efficient way. You can't make up for inefficiencies by having more people. You need to address that on the front end. Second part, as was said earlier, is that you need to train. You need to train with 2 people. If you're going to run on fires with 2 people, don't train with 4. Train with 2. Design your tactics around the staffing level that you have, and seek efficiencies in how your tactics are designed.
Boy, you answered most of that already. Clear delineation of tasks, tactical and strategic level objectives focused on 2-person operations. As was said earlier, setting up for 3 or 4, that's unrealistic and setting yourself up for a disaster. Making sure that those are clear, delineated, and practiced on a regular and routine basis?
So before I came to Gladstone, I worked in two departments as an ops chief and a training chief. That was two-man engine companies, and you got to train the first few minutes for decision points with a two-man engine. If you don't do that, there's sort of the false sense of because it's training, you've scheduled more people to be there at the scene for the first 5 minutes. You never get to do that. So make sure that captain and that engineer have to figure out what to do as two people at the scene, and then make sure that your protocols support that, because now you're doing the task kind of in series instead of in parallel, and you got to adjust.
So I actually work on a two-person engine company, and so to me the biggest thing is recognize who you are and be proud of who you are. And I've seen a lot of agencies, and I've been with some agencies that look at a neighboring department that runs bigger staffing. They have the 3, the 4-person companies. Their companies are 6 minutes apart. Where I am, my second due is 20 minutes out on a good day. So you can't just look at a neighbor and go, I like their policies, I like their protocols, I like what they do, and I'm just going to cut and paste and put my department's logo and name on top and use theirs because it looks cool. Because they're setting it up for what they have. You have to look and go, like the other gentleman said, this is what I have, and I have to design my policies around that. If I can take certain things from them that I like, that's great, but just be careful to recognize that you are who you are, and like they said, you have what you have, and don't try to be the big boys.
I'll take a little bit of a different tack and just say that technology allows us, for two-person engine companies, to find examples on the internet. And one of the best examples of a fire attack and rescue I've ever seen was, I believe, from a rural department in Ohio who had a front mount pump, showed up, had 2 people, started attacking a well-involved living room fire in a ranch, farm-style house, knocked down a lot of fire from the outside, found out there was a victim behind a front door in a survivable space, opened a door, walked her out, found out there was another victim in the basement. Because they had knocked down the fire, they were able to go down and walk her out. And you can see this stuff on the internet. You don't have to, necessarily listen all the time. You can watch it, so it's available.
When I first heard this question, the first thing that popped in my mind is if you have a 2-person company, you need to find more people. If you do have a 2-person company and you're going to work, you need to find out what you can do safely. You can't do the work of 16 people. If you are going to be command and apparatus operator, well, then you better prepare for the people that are coming behind you to lay lines in. You better get your own water supply. You better set up command so that you know who is coming and what's going to go on next. If no one's coming, then you're going to have to default back to what this gentleman just said, and you're going to have to fight the fire from the outside. 2 people can't do the work of 16, which was said earlier. It takes at least 16 to 18, maybe 20 people to run a house fire. Don't try to be that 20 people.
The next question is, how do you maximize training with a limited budget, both in time and in money?
You look at our industry, and there's a lot of catchphrases like ICS, and I worked for, it's called CAL FIRE now, but CDF for part of my career, and they had beat fire scope into me, and I just remember finance, logistics, operations, and planning. So if you have a limited time and a limited budget, you got to put in some effort to maximize it. So, take the financing side of it, break it down. Do I want to spend all my money now? What operational objectives do I want to, make an assessment, make a plan. I particularly like a acronym, SOAPI, subjective, objective, assessment, planning, implement, and evaluate. I think what is missed a lot when you have a small budget is that evaluate. Once you implement your training, did you get what you were expecting out of it? And if you don't follow that critical thinking process and you have a limited time, you usually end up a week or 2 later going, man, that was a missed opportunity. So try to minimize those missed opportunities.
Currently, come from a place where over the years, they've kind of slashed our training division, and there's just not really much there. And so us as a company, I know that we've had to get kind of creative with catching those opportunities of training, because for us, time isn't always a factor that plays into our favor. We're on the busiest company in the city. So, for us, what has worked is every time you're, on a medical call, stay an extra 5 minutes. Talk about the stretch that you would have to make if this was a fire. How are you guys going to VES those windows? How are you guys, are you able to be oriented to the building and know what's on the inside by looking at the outside of the structure? I think having those discussions with your crews at those points in time when you're out of the station, on those fire alarms, stretch dry hose. That way the next time that fire alarm is real, you're going to know how to stretch your hose and where it needs to go and how to be effective when it is the real deal. So, you're going to have to be creative, especially if your training budget or your time slots are cut short. So it's going to just take proactive acts upon the crew, and realizing that every time you're out of the bay and in the engine looking around at all those buildings in your first due, talk about them. Think about ways how to be efficient on that real game call. So.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. I really like the EMS example of, when you go on an EMS call, where do you go to fires usually? The places where you go on EMS calls. So look at the building layout, look at where the kitchen is, look at where the bedrooms are, those types of things. Understand the building construction. One of the things that's been communicated to me that's a good rule of thumb is, one task, 1 hour, once a day, if possible. One of my mentors told me that, and that's not always possible, especially if you're working on a busy company, but, you can't give lip service to training. You just got to get out there and do it. I mean, that's the only way we get better, so.
Well, I think I'll start off with stealing a line from Mark, and that is that the basis of this is excellence is my responsibility. You're in the firehouse, you have your tools, you have your equipment, you have the people that you have. There's a training opportunity right there. If I started off as a training officer with a training budget of $0, so we had to use what we had. And some of the examples have been given already. Go on a medical call, talk about the stretch, look for opportunities. If you go to the grocery store, you drive around back and you discuss forcible entry on back doors in the commercial district or whatever it might be. You go onto YouTube in the morning and you see what kind of fire porn's been posted for the last 24 hours. Is there anything interesting there? Are there any lessons that can be learned? That doesn't cost anything. So, I really think training with a limited budget is you're only limited by your imagination and your commitment.
So training doesn't necessarily focus to dollars. There's a couple things to consider if you have a limited resource financially for your training program. Number one is to define the end state. Everybody wants to know what the end state of our training program is, because number one, it's got to be realistic. You go back to the 3 R's of training. Is it realistic? Is it realistic for your organization you're in, the type of training that you want to achieve? 2, is it relevant? Having a relevant training program is specific to entity and specific to personnel. Every time you apply yourself, is it realistic? Is it relevant? And 3, is it repetitive? Can we repeat it over and over and over again to build the muscle memory? Those 3 things support end state. End state is what we've defined our training program and what we want it to be.
Well, you got to think about what your training division is, and to me, it's every officer, every senior firefighter, and every motivated junior firefighter. So if you don't have a training division in the budget, you still do have a training division. And then what are you training for? You're training rookies, new EMTs, medics for competency, and you're training in-service people for mastery. So those are kind of 2 different things that you need to look at.
So it's funny, Mark had made a statement that everybody interprets things a little differently. So Chief Harton had mentioned excellence is my responsibility. and he gave his thought on that, and I'll give you my thought on it, is that excellence is your responsibility. And ultimately, if your organization, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, because we all have lives and families and mortgages and car payments and everything else, but ultimately, if your agency is not able to provide you what you need to fill that void in your heart, that burning you have for this job, then you have to go out and seek it out. So sometimes that means paying for a conference. Sometimes that means taking some time and watching some videos. Sometimes it means flying FDIC on your own dime. Those are the things we have to do. I come back to the wire cutters example. I think most of us are smart enough, we've taken enough firefighter survival classes that we carry a pair of wire cutters in our coat pocket. Some people, their departments give it to them when they get on the job. For a lot of us, we buy them at the hardware store and put them in there ourselves. If you feel like you're not there 100% on ladders, and there's a ladders class coming up, maybe it's worth the $50 or $100 and that weekend. Maybe it's not. It's going to be up to you. But get that training. And if that means doing it on your own sometimes, or with a group of like-minded firefighters going away for a weekend and making it a fun trip, then that's what you have to do.
A couple things for me. It's kind of where I'm at. Absolutely free to review every one of your calls to one degree or another. It doesn't cost a dime. And the reviewing history will help you to make the future better. And you don't have to go over the mistakes. You can go over what went well, and you can review your EMS calls. You can review your fire alarm calls. You can take that call and make it a 3-alarm fire if it's a fire alarm. There's all kinds of things you can do to review the call. And I'm going to tag on to his statement about spending your own money. I'm not telling anybody to do it, but I had a choice a few years ago to spend $25,000 on a master's degree, which is a fine thing, but I chose to travel the country and go learn from the best across the country. That's my master's degree, and it's my insurance policy for my family. And I feel very good about that. I'm not telling anybody else to do that. I'm just saying there's a number of folks who have done that. I run into them all the time. So those are ways to get that done.
I'm going to take it in a different direction. I've been the training officer of our fire department, and I've been a volunteer at another fire department. And when you choose end result, some people choose that end result for you, and you should check those things out. The state cares about how much training you do, and they have a defined list of things that you need to do to accomplish in a 1 or 2 year time to be a firefighter. The state has a list of things for you to accomplish in a 1 or 2 year time to be an EMT, to be a paramedic, to be an intermediate or an advanced. When you start your training calendar, start with those things. Fill up the blocks, spread them out so you're not doing EMS for 4 months, driving for 4 months, ladders for 4 months. Spread them across the calendar. You'll be amazed at how much the state would like you to do. The calendar fills up really fast. So if you are on a limited budget, it isn't what are we going to do, it's how we're going to accomplish each one of those tasks.
When you're in an emergency situation, communicating effectively with your team can make the difference between life and death. That's why we've put a tremendous amount of effort into building the voice communications capabilities of the MSA G1 SCBA.
Starting with the Facepiece, we've maintained our best-in-class speech recognition through our speaking diaphragm.
Listening to your demands, we've taken it to the next level, developing the Facepiece with an open breathing port design. This design increases speech clarity even further when off air.
With your Facepiece on, you'll sound like this.
When it's time to go on air, from your first breath, you'll be heard loud and clear. The G1 regulator contains 2 microphones positioned in an optimal location to capture your voice. Whether you speak in a whisper or a yell, your voice is clearly projected through the shoulder-mounted speaker module.
So you'll sound like this.
We've even figured out how to filter out the distracting noise caused by your inhalation breath, so you won't hear this. At MSA, we don't believe that clear communication is optional. To make electronic voice amplification standard, we've removed the amplifier from the facepiece and made it part of the SCBA. This accomplishes a number of things. It makes the facepiece lighter, reducing fatigue. It improves visibility. It allows for a more streamlined profile that poses less of a snag hazard. It makes electronic voice amplification standard equipment for every firefighter, making personal issue facepieces a cost-effective option. At MSA, we always look for ways to make firefighters and other first responders safer and more effective. Because when you go in, we go in with you. The G1 SCBA. Contact your local sales manager to learn more.